Our guest today is Jill Castle. Welcome to Free Your Inner Guru, Jill. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Laura. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I would love to frame up everything we're going to talk today with a little bit about your story and in your career, how you came to be a dietitian and why you chose pediatrics. And then we'll get into, a big conversation about health and impact on and really anything as far as leadership and just have that bigger conversation together. So just
Okay.
take us back so we get to know you.
Oh, take us back. So, originally I thought I was going to be a doctor. And so I went the track of at university studying pre-med. And unfortunately, I was a victim of the weed out process when I took organic chemistry. My brain is very challenged with maps and geography, and organic chemistry really is like geometrical blueprints and systems and things. So I didn't fail, but I didn't do well enough to feel like I could move on to medical school. So I took a different, I pivoted basically, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. My dad said, try all these different things out, try nutrition. So I took a nutrition 101 class and really I did very well in it. And it really just connected with my brain. It was enough science and enough, just all the things I was looking for, biology, physiology, anatomy. It was all those great things. So I did my nutrition major, and way back then, 28 years ago, you had to do an internship. And today it's a little bit different. You still do an internship, but there's a lot of different pathways to becoming a registered dietitian. Did my internship at Boston, in Boston at Mass General, did a pediatric rotation for 2 weeks. And basically during your internship, you're rotating through all these different populations, cardiovascular patients, cancer patients, and you get to do 2 weeks on a pediatric floor, which I fell in love day one. I was scared out of my pants because these people were so little and so vulnerable and so sick. I was so afraid I was going to hurt them. But I love children. I have 4 of my own. I spent my younger years babysitting and working with kids all the time. So it was a natural fit, challenging professionally, medically, nutritionally, scientifically challenging. So it fed all of those sort of needs that I had. And so I started down the path of pediatric nutrition. I was fortunate when I ended my internship that Mass General had a position open in that area. So they offered it to me. I took it, and there I started. Over the years, it's evolved over the years from, working in hospitals with very sick children as a clinical dietitian to being a stay-at-home full-time mom for 9 years, to then opening my own business, starting with a private practice, and then sort of branching out into all kinds of different avenues, blogging, podcasting, authorship, speaking, all kinds of things.
And what is the change that you seek to make through your work?
So I oftentimes, I think about this a lot because when I first started, I had a very strong passion for children and helping parents do a great job of feeding their children. But over time, I've realized that I have a purpose and that there's a reason I'm on this planet, and that is to help parents. The byproduct is that children get the best nutrition and the best relationship around food as a result of that. But my purpose is to help parents do better at feeding and nourishing their children. And then secondarily, I've discovered over the last 5 or so years that my purpose is also to help other nutrition professionals in my field get started in their businesses, see their businesses as a bigger opportunity for impact than just working with one person at a time.
So important. And what was it that made the shift to you from being motivated to help the kids to help or support the parents?
I think the shift initially started, the seed was planted for the shift when I had my first baby. And I remember my husband and I, we went through this Lamaze class. We spent like 12 weeks, 2 or 3 hours a week, learning how to breathe and anticipate all the different steps of birthing a baby. And then we went and had our baby, and it was a 15-hour delivery. It was a little traumatic, I have to add, but we got through it. I was prepared based on this Lamaze class. And I remember saying to my husband, gee, if we gave half this time to parents to educate them around feeding their babies and their toddlers and their kids and their teens, think about what a difference that would make. That was a comment I made it to my husband 23 years ago. It wasn't until probably 6 or 7 years ago that I realized that this actually is a huge problem in our country. The fact that we don't prepare parents for nourishing their children, the fact that we don't do a very good job of supporting them throughout childhood is really, I believe, a big reason why we have so many health problems in children that are related to nutrition today. Things like child obesity and picky eating and food allergies. They're all tied in some way, shape, or form to the lack of education that parents get and the lack of support. The only time parents get support for nutrition is if they have a problem.
And by problem, my mind, I didn't raise any young children, but I taught school. That was my first career. So I had kids in the classroom, and I had quite a scope of working in wealthier neighborhoods versus neighborhoods that were less economically viable. And so you would see definite differences in the children's appearances, and by that I mean like their skin tone and their energy levels and so forth. So I'm thinking of that, but I'm also and I guess I'm framing that up as potentially behavioral issues, and as what other issues were coming out that got your attention in that way.
I think, from anywhere from like the day-to-day struggles that parents have with trying to get their kids to eat what they make, those basic struggles that happen at the table. Please take another bite. If you do, I'll give you dessert. If you don't finish your plate, you have to sit at the table until you do, or you're going to get that food the next morning. Those basic struggles are happening every single day across America. And as a result, many times our children are growing up with a distorted, dysfunctional relationship with food. They might not like coming to the table. They might, favor sweets over vegetables because they've been bribed so many times over the years. But that is a basic, and then blowing that out and looking at, 1 in 3 children are overweight or obese in our country. That's a food problem, but it's also a feeding problem. It's an education problem as well as an economic problem. And so, ADHD, behavioral issues in the classroom, in part are related to nutrition. Perhaps lack of certain nutrients early on, inadequate eating during school, no breakfast, lack of appetite for lunch. I mean, if you've been a teacher, you've seen all of this, but even iron deficiency anemia, even just kids who are underweight, not growing well. There's just a whole gamut. And I'm not saying that a lack of education of parents is the reason for all of these things, but it certainly plays a role. And I believe that if parents were better supported early on, a lot of these things could be avoided or corrected before they got too difficult for families to turn them around.
So what would be a red flag for somebody listening to think, that there would be solutions that they need to look at? Because it sounds like it would be very disempowering, and to not feel like you knew what you were doing when it came to feeding your kids. And then I'm actually going back to, I've never had my own child, but I have a stepson who was full-time with me as a teenager. And so he came into my life, and his dad obviously came into my life. And I was not just feeding me and my dog. I was feeding 3. Yeah. And that was a lot.
It is a lot.
He was quite a lot older though. Like it wasn't childhood nutrition necessarily, but still it's like, where's the guidebook?
Exactly. Where's the guidebook? where's the guide?
Yeah.
I mean, I consider myself a guide, but how many parents know that somebody like me is out there? They go to their pediatrician, and their pediatrician might say, yes, we have a problem. I'm going to send you to a pediatric dietitian. But many times a pediatrician says, don't worry about it. You'll get through this. And yes, it can be very frightening, concerning, and disempowering for parents to know in their heart that they're struggling with an issue around food and nutrition and feeding with their child, and not knowing where to find help. And oftentimes, you know, the internet, the web world complicates this even further sometimes, because then we go out in the internet and we look for solutions and answers, and everybody's a nutrition expert. If you eat, you're an expert, at least on yourself you are, but there are a lot of people out there that are passing along potentially well, what I see anyways is potentially information that really is geared towards adults, and it's applied to kids. And kids are a very special population. They're growing, their needs are changing all the time. And teens, yes, I consider as, you know, fitting under that umbrella of child nutrition, because there is an enormous amount of growth that's happening during the adolescent years, and nutrient needs are shooting up very high. So are calorie needs and protein and all these different elements that they need to support that growth. And yet at the same time, they have all this freedom and independence, and they're making choices for themselves, and they do need a guide. They need a knowledgeable parent to help them navigate the world of food, because otherwise they're going to be at the drive-through fast food restaurant on the daily if they have their driver's license. And many parents aren't comfortable with that. They know they don't want their child eating that way, but they don't know how to approach it and manage it.
It sounds to me like it's also, and I think because I have that framework of the teenager in my head, it's also sometimes a battle for control of some time of is that come up?
Yeah, that's the developmental component of raising children all through childhood. Every child wants some level of autonomy and agency. And we see the toddler and the teen being very similar. I do it. No. I want the independence. I'm making my own decisions. I don't care what you say. That's all very normal, but it can really throw parents for a loop. And so again, when parents know what to anticipate and they're educated and they have a guide to get them through these stages, they can rest assured, feel empowered, not disempowered, and help their children navigate through these times.
And I think the goal of any parenting relationship is to be able to look, oh, I raised a healthy, independent, you know, person, you know, adult with values and sense of self.
Mm-hmm.
And this seems like has a tremendous impact
I think it does.
in that development of agency, right? Because you
I
want them to know who they are.
Yep.
So let's go over some of the things that you see as either problematic or symptomatic that something might be off.
So with the teenager or with any age child?
Yeah, with any age kid. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think if you're a parent and you're struggling at the table to get your child to eat, and your child is digging in their heels and not very compliant, not very excited, there's not a lot of joy at the table when you come together as a family, that's a red flag that something is off. It has nothing to do with the food that you're putting on the table. It has everything to do with the dynamic and the relationship. And so what we know about children is these dynamics and relationships definitely affect how well they eat, how healthy they eat. So we want to get all three things right. We want to get the food right. We want to get the feeding interaction right. And we want to get that developmental support in the right place. So anytime, you know, and of course, physical signs, anytime you see a child's weight really drop off or really pick up, that can be a concern. That can be a red flag for unhealthy eating, inadequate nutrition. I think if you're seeing behaviors that are repetitive around food, if you're seeing anxiety at the table or around food, if you're seeing a child being too controlling with their food and not relaxed about food, it can throw up a red flag that there's a disturbed relationship with food in somehow, some way. And I'm kind of thinking about, disordered eating and the development of eating disorders. So there are lots of things. What I've come to know, I've been in this field for 28 years. What I've come to know is that parents pretty much know when something's off. They might not say something's off, and I know there's something off, but they might feel it internally, and they might be trying to figure it out and work it out on their own. Oftentimes when there is a problem and a child lands in my office, for example, the parent will know that there's been a problem going on for a while that they've been trying to figure out and get on top of. So I really believe when a parent comes to the doctor and says, I'm really worried about my child who's a picky eater, and the doctor says, don't worry about it, this is normal. But the parent knows inside, no, this is not normal. I know it's not normal, but I'm going to go with the authority here who says it is. I believe the parent. I always believe the parent, because as a parent myself, when things are off. When things are off with your child. And if it's food, what they eat, how much they eat, the types of foods they pick, their weight status, you get a good sense. If you know your kid, you know when things are off or going down the wrong path.
And so I suppose the idea is that it's not just a stage. There's probably things that you can do about it. Mm-hmm. Or it may be a stage, but maybe it's a stage we don't want to go on for years and years and years.
Exactly. There are lots of stages, but each stage has an endpoint, and there are lots of stages that are connected. Everything's connected. So how you do with infancy and infant nutrition and feeding is going to connect and reflect on toddlerhood, and how well you do through toddlerhood with feeding your toddler will inform and influence the child, the childhood years. So that all the stages are connected. And, for example, picky eating is a big topic amongst parents. I will tell parents, it's typical for children age 2 to 6, but beyond 6, that's not normal. So there's an end to that stage. There's an end point. And of course, every child is different. But if you've got an 8 or a 9-year-old that's still really picky, there's something else going on. We're past that developmental norm. So then we need to dig in and figure out what's going on. If you have a child who seems to be, really taken with sweets and treats and really into them and triggered by them and can't seem to have control over them, there's not really an end stage to that unless you do something in your home to help shift the path. Because that's something that just builds over time. Why is that child so triggered and involved with sweets? Is it because they never get any? Is it because you've been so restrictive that they never get those foods? Or is it because, they're dealing emotionally with other issues and they're using food and treats and sweets to deal with them? So there's oftentimes underlying things that can be uncovered and dealt with.
If you look at things from sort of a societal level, what do you see some of the impact of leaving these things untended to?
Well, I think we see it in growing healthcare issues amongst children. Like I mentioned, obesity. How long have we been fighting the childhood obesity thing? For a long, long time. And we're not really making grounds in that area. We're not making progress. If you look at some of the other statistics, food allergies are on the rise in children. ADHD and other behavioral concerns on the rise in children. Iron deficiency, anemia, rickets is coming back, which is a vitamin D deficiency. There are lots of things in childhood that are getting worse, not better. And that relates, that from a societal standpoint, that increases our health insurance, our load on our hospitals, and on our healthcare systems. And we also know that children who are challenged by medical conditions at a young age may be still dealing with those issues at an older age. So not to paint a picture of doom and gloom, because I I definitely don't think it has to be that way. But I think the other impact, and we can't deny this, is that, media and marketing and advertising and the internet all has such a powerful impact on children and on their parents, but particularly on children. And I just did my own podcast. I just did an interview with the author of the book called Kid Food. And, we really went back to the 1900s and looked at how different food was for children then and what it is like today. And kids today are a target market for advertisers. They're a target market. Advertisers spend billions of dollars trying to get parents and children to buy their products. That's a problem.
It is a problem. It's interesting because I was at Costco yesterday. Mm-hmm. And I was fortunate in my own, when I was living in early stages of living on my own, I happened upon a book. It's now, I don't know how well regarded it is now, but it certainly planted in me, it was Protein Power. Mm-hmm. And it planted in me the idea of shopping the outside of the grocery store, mm-hmm. which was an excellent habit. Mm-hmm. So I've, since then, 20 plus years, I haven't spent a lot of time in the middle aisles.
Yeah.
So when I was at, and not in the sections certainly where there's stuff with young kids, because I never really had to feed a young child on a day-to-day basis. But there was something, and maybe it was because I was subconsciously anticipating speaking with you, but I walked down an aisle at Costco yesterday, and at the end of that aisle, on the outside aisle, there was all these kids snacks. So there's all the purples and it's cartoony, and I was like, oh, I'm not used to seeing that on the outside of the grocery store.
Yeah.
And it's the shiny object.
Yeah. It's the shiny object, and it's the pester power. It's the put it out here so the kids can see it, so they will pester their parents to buy it. I think, in all, it's very challenging for parents today to raise healthy eaters. They don't have the education, the knowledge, and the support, number one, which I talked about, but they also are facing a lot of obstacles. They can get everything in their home 100% lovely, wonderful. They can be feeding nice, healthy, balanced meals. They can have treats and sweets that they offer their kids so they know how much and when those are happening. They can have positive family meals together. But then they let their children go out the front door and go to school or go to church or go to sports practices, and all that healthy eating influence is off. And kids are out there getting exposed and given lots of foods that parents might not necessarily want their kids to have. And when that happens, it's just a real uphill, difficult challenge for parents. It's frustrating. It is not easy. It's not easy to feed and raise a child. It's 18 years of, anywhere from 4 to 6 feedings a day, depending on the age of the child. And then you have to contend with all the outside food and the influences like media and marketing. It's just a lot. It's a lot for parents today.
What are there any skills that or basic skills that you guide parents towards as far as putting down a framework for this? Like, how do you approach it?
So my approach is, I like to have families set up structure within the house around food and eating and meals and snacks. So a framework, something kids can count on, it's predictable for them. So that basically means meals and snacks kind of happening at the same time every day. You can give or take 15, 30 minutes, but happening on a routine in the same place. And the parent is making the decisions about the menu and the meals and the snacks, not the child, which is hard for some families because some families have given that responsibility unintentionally over to the child. But having a system and a routine in place, and then, teaching families how to create a balanced meal. And not just how to create a balanced meal, but how to rotate foods and make it interesting, and flavors and textures, and really getting parents to understand that, the job of a parent in terms of feeding a child is to introduce them to as many different flavors and textures as you can, and to keep that mealtime as pleasant and positive as you can. Because you're not only wanting to have a child who eats healthy, you want them to have a good relationship with food. And that means, for your listeners who might not know what that means, you want to raise a child who enjoys eating, who is not going to come to the table and say, oh, I can't eat that. That's not on my diet today. Or, oh, I can't have that. That's so toxic and bad for my body. When we teach children these things at a young age, it really sets a dichotomy up in their brains about food. And it's not the best way to nurture a healthy relationship with food.
It sounds to me too, like we're talking about food, but we're talking about so much more, right? Like that's beliefs, that's relationships, that's stress management.
Yes. And I think if I'm totally transparent, one of my biggest frustrations about my profession is that people think nutrition is just food, and it's not. There is so much underneath what's on that plate. It is your childhood history. How were you raised? How were you treated around food? And how has that influenced how you feel about food? And not only that, how do you feel about your own body, your own weight, your own place in this world? Because when you acknowledge that, that will reveal your biases in how you are raising your own children. So there's a lot of psychology behind this. There's, the other thing is that interaction around food. If you're forcing and controlling and bribing your child to eat, or taking things away and punishing and threatening, that psychology, that doesn't help your child eat better. That makes it worse for your child. But yet parents, unfortunately, are driven to, with the best of intentions, to feed their children as best they can, but it can sometimes lead them to participate in some of these interactions that are negative for the child, and frankly counterproductive to developing healthy eating habits and a healthy relationship with food.
And while you were describing that, I was also envisioning what's it going to take to get that same child to, say, study for good grades later. Mm-hmm. Like, it gets more expensive.
Yeah.
Now to look at the parent just wants to get the food, wants to get the meal done.
Yes.
Right? The parent has XYZ clients, responsibilities, appointments, bosses.
They're busy.
They're busy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what? Yeah. Like
it is. Yeah. I mean, it is the I want this for my child, but this is my reality. And in order to get over here, honestly, I have to change my mindset, my priorities, and the daily actions that I'm taking. This is a beautiful place to be. Connecting with your child around food and feeding is a very beautiful, rewarding, empowering place to be for a parent. Being over here, I'm stressed out, I don't have time, I just want to get through this, ultimately leads parents down a path of guilt, dissatisfaction, and disempowerment, and regret, because they get to that 18th year and they had all this time to be over here nurturing, connecting, making the most of those moments, but they're too busy to, and then we regret, or we have health problems, or, I should have done this differently. And what I really try to emphasize with my clients and in the work I do is that path. Sometimes we have to do it differently than the way we were raised. We need to educate ourselves a little bit more, and we need to embrace the role and the power behind parenting is so strong. I mean, there's such great power there to mold children into those healthy eaters, but it's not on a wish and a prayer. It takes daily effort,
Do you
structure,
see,
consistency.
I'm just going to time out because remember how I said I don't think the sun's going to come out anytime soon?
Oh.
I am getting blown out. There we go.
Yeah.
That's the southern exposure for you.
There you go.
On the audio, I'll just cut that
I'm getting
piece
all
out.
hot and heated up. You got me going.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's good. I love it. I love it. So that little bit won't be in here. So I want to tap back into that because I'm like, she's on a roll, right? So okay, this is mirroring a conversation I had literally this morning with a nutritionist who works with adults, and we were talking about, and I'm a coach, so we get chatting, and she said something along the lines like, when I'm working with my clients, if they're not able to make the changes that I'm suggesting, or if they don't make the changes, like they've paid me, I'm doing what I'm doing with them. She was articulating that she's like, and I take it so personally, like what am I not doing? How am I not communicating it? How am I not conveying this to be able to have that impact? And, and I said to her, I said, well, it's not the food. And she's like, I know. And like, we know it's not the food, and yet we make it the food.
Well, that's the easy thing to do. It's black or white. It's a healthy diet or it's a not healthy diet. I'm at fault for this or I'm successful at that. But it is not. The food is the end, sort of the end result of everything underneath. I would propose, I work with clients too. And when they're not making the changes, I mean, I've been doing this for so long, I realize that not everybody is ready to make the changes. It's like anything, weight loss, fitness improvement, a bigger salary, bigger income in your business. You have these goals up here, but there is so much work that has to happen below that to get there. And you really have to be committed and persistent and consistent. And for me, if a client can't do those things, we back it way back down to the things that they can do. Because I do think it's very important to make steps of progress. Otherwise, you lose your clients. If they are not seeing progress, we might have to redefine what progress looks like. We might have to make those steps very, very small, but every little step forward leads to the next step. And sometimes parents, for me, they come in thinking it's food, and we dive into other stuff like feeding and their childhood experiences and how that translates to what they're doing today. And that almost always grabs their attention because nobody's ever talked to them about those things before. And they are emotional things that resonate and speak to their heart. And they realize that, yeah, it wasn't great for me. I don't want to do that to my kid. I want to do it differently.
I don't want to act that out again in the parent role.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That can be huge.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find I was thinking about sustainability when you were saying sometimes back it down. We live in a culture that talks a lot about instant results or markets for instant results. And I see that a lot in my work. I certainly see it in my Facebook, Instagram, and whatever feeds in the, right?
Social media is not my favorite.
No, me neither. Me neither. Right.
Yeah.
But that's what they're steeped in, the kids and the parents. And I know I'm generalizing, but that's what most people are steeped in. And I think that's very shaming. Like heaping like layer upon layer of shame onto what is a very real day-to-day challenge. Yes. Whether that's feeding the child or growing the business or whatever, like that in the trenches work is.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, we sort of punish ourselves by going into social media with our problems. I mean, we open ourselves wide open to everybody's opinion. We'll do this or do that. I see it all the time. That's why I don't really like to participate. Even though I run a business page, I get questions. I don't know. I try to keep it on the lighter side and not personal. Because to me, personal, if you have a personal issue, and it can be a fast fix, you can get a nice little, resource and go check it out. But if you've got a problem, if you've got a child failing to thrive or is, doesn't eat anything, and you're coming to Facebook for answers, that's not the right place to go. Yeah, you're going to get feedback that's going to make you feel bad about yourself. You're going to get unsolicited feedback about things that you should be doing differently, which is ultimately going to cause pain and guilt and shame and all of those things. I think, in terms of sustainability, I think, as a practicing dietitian, you as a coach, that we have to meet our families exactly where they're at. And to understand where they're at, we have to ask a lot of questions and hope that we're getting truthful answers. And I always encourage my families, to be as honest and transparent as they can be, and to also be prepared for questions from me that are going to dig a little bit, because I'm going to be able to help them so much better if I understand those things than if we're all playing like it's just about the food.
So tell me more about that.
I think sometimes we are surface. It's safe and we play on the surface, and even professionals, we don't dig in. And I think that I believe that successful professionals who are successful are that way because they've tapped into some secret sauce, some magic, interactions, some motivational stuff that keeps their clients coming back and helps their clients be successful. I think if you are, let me give you a meal plan and here's the answer to your problems, you're not going very far with that client and you're not truly helping them.
So, and you mentioned early in our conversation that what you do now in your practice has evolved. You're still working with the families and the parents, in particular. But you also said that you're helping other nutritionists develop their business. Mm-hmm. Is that, do you incorporate that into your work with them? Do you try to shift how people are working?
Yeah, I do. So I started working with other nutritionists in the pediatric space and other healthcare professionals in the pediatric space about 3 years ago. I resisted doing it for a long time. I get asked a lot or over the years, I've been asked a lot to mentor other professionals and help them. And I used to say, that's not my people. That's not what I'm here to do. I'm here to help parents. You guys figure out your own thing. And then with the help of my own business coach, I realized that, when the world is asking things of you, you need to pause and listen. And which I did. And I developed a program for professionals that is mainly a business program, but conversations about counseling and interacting with families and digging in and really figuring out what they need is an important part of the coaching that I do with these professionals, because we all know that people come to our offices or for appointments and they think they know what they need. They're asking for specific things. They think they know what they need. But if you're a really good clinician, you're going to be able to see that there are a lot of things they need that they're not asking for. They probably don't even recognize that they need these things. And as a good clinician, part of your job is to uncover their true needs. Give them what they want, but figure out what they really need. And oftentimes in my line of work, it's not a diet plan.
And how do you handle that? How do you, under the umbrella of dietitian, how do you sort of have one foot in the world of food and diet and one foot in, this is like more like personal mastery, or It's
Yeah,
a
I
whole
mean,
other level, isn't it?
yeah, I mean, I will say I'm not a counselor and I don't do counseling, but I think that there is food psychology and eating psychology that is natural and part and parcel to the work that any nutrition professional is doing. Um, so, how do I handle it with the professionals? I encourage them to dig for themselves into ways that they can better connect with their clientele. Because if you want to grow a business, you need to be connected with your clients. And some professionals are challenged with repeat long-term relationships with their clients. And to me, that's a symptom of not really connecting with the client. So we might need to work on, how do you connect with the client? How do you start your assessments? How do you welcome them into your office? How do you communicate with them before the appointment, during the appointment, after the appointment? There's so many nuances, and everybody has their own style.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that if you're dealing with the problem that you can't get enough clients, or you're not getting repeat traffic, that's a symptom of, well, I could be an optimistic and say, you've given them everything they need in one visit, but the practical part of me knows that's unlikely.
Yeah. Transformation does not happen in one.
No, not at all.
Right? I mean, I think that's a little bit buying into the quick fix ourselves, potentially.
Potentially, yeah.
Right? Like thinking that you should be able to make that transformation in one or two conversations.
No.
Versus which just feeds that instant fix culture even more. And nobody wins.
No. And I think, to be balanced in this, I think, sometimes people will come and they will just need a good resource, and they're highly capable parents around nutrition and feeding, but they got stuck a little in one little spot, and good resources, an appointment or two with me, get them right on the right track. They're bounced back and they're good. But if you have somebody who comes, with a child who, has a medical condition, that is something they're going to deal with for the long term. And even though they may not come and meet with me every, 2 weeks for the next year, ideally, they need a touchstone. And so the appointments with me might be, 5-6 appointments off over the first, 3 to 6 months. But then I'm their touchstone. I'm their person they come when they just want to check in. Like, I think all families need to have a person that they can check in with. It doesn't mean there's a problem. It doesn't mean that there's, crazy stuff going on. It's just a touch point. Hey, this is what we're doing. Are we on the right track? I think we are. All is good. I had a couple questions about this, that, and the other. You're doing great. I'm here if you need me. So I think that's another way, professionals can look at their role, as opposed to looking at it as, I've got to get somebody to transform in 2 visits because that's the only amount of time they're going to come and see me. Look for ways to extend that relationship. Don't be afraid to be that person that they come to and return to, even when things are good. They don't have to come and see you just for bad things or challenges.
Do you think that by trying to do too much, it could in fact have the opposite effect of being overwhelming? And, as soon as, and overwhelm is just, there's not a sustainable thing to that.
Right. Yeah. Overwhelm. And most parents that I work with are overwhelmed in some way, shape, or form. They've got their kids enrolled in all kinds of things and activities, and they can't get dinner on the table, or, they're eating out too much and they don't like it, but they don't know how to not do that. I mean, I think everybody's busy. If you're a working parent, it's challenging. I'm a working parent. It's challenging, but obviously my lens is nutrition. So planning meals and getting meals on the table, that's very important to me. And So I know it can happen, but if it's not very important to somebody else, we need to adjust sort of the reality and the goals for them.
When you're out speaking and working with other professionals, what's the change that you would like to see, or what are some of the changes that you would like to see in our North American look at food and nutrition and children? Where do you think we're missing the boat as a whole?
Yeah. So that's a really good question. So I do a lot of speaking on sort of the modern approach to childhood nutrition. I do workshops, full day, half day workshops, keynotes, and the the point of that whole thing, and my whole goal for my audience, no matter how I'm delivering this topic, it's to have them have a mindset shift away from it's just about food to this broader scope and view of child nutrition. Yes, it's partly about food, but it's also about feeding, and it's also about child development. And we need those three areas to come together for parents to be truly successful. And so in my speaking to other professionals, I'm teaching them these three components. I'm showing them, all the basics about food and nutrients, depending on whatever age group I'm talking about, but I'm teaching them about feeding styles, feeding practices, how to set up structure, how to say no, how to close the kitchen, how to set boundaries and limits. And then I'm teaching them about development, which could be, what to expect during toddlerhood and childhood and teenager, but what to capitalize on. What do you need to focus on? With the teenager, you're focusing on guiding and governing. You're not hands-free. Hey, you're 16. I don't have to do anything anymore. No, your role is to guide and govern. With the toddler, it's to embrace their desire for independence. How can you change what you do in the home to support and encourage their autonomy and their independence? So when I go out and speak, I'm teaching professionals. My goal is for them to change the way they practice, for them to not bring people into their offices and just talk about a meal plan, to actually take this broader definition of child nutrition and bring that into their own practice, to triage patients using the system of what, how, and why. Because sometimes kids will come in and they need food and nutrient focused interventions. But other times kids come in and it's a developmental thing where the parent isn't supporting their development, or it's a feeding thing. So I want clinicians to triage using my sort of the what, the why, and the how of feeding. I want them to triage using those three different areas so they can actually be better and more effective in their practicing.
Do you ever get to have the parents, I guess we already covered this, so I don't want to loop back around, and I might do an edit, but I'm thinking about parents and their ability to navigate this. And like, are you teaching the parents to look at their child in the same way?
Yes and no. Yes and no. What I do with the parents is try to make it as simple and easy as possible. My goal for the families that work with me is they walk out and they're like, I got this, no problem. I can do this. 1, 2, 3, no problem. I'm going to practice those 3 things or 2 things for the next 2 weeks. When I come back, we're going to work on these next. I want them to walk out of my office feeling like, I've got this. This is a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. That's my goal.
I'm hearing it so empowered.
Oh yeah.
Right? Like giving the power back around food. Yes. And all the corollary benefits.
Yes. And you can do this. You have all the skills. If you don't have the skills, I'm going to teach you the skills, but you're going to be able to do this. Like you're going to be the nutritionist in your home. You need me right now, but eventually you're not going to need me. You're going to be able to rock this yourself.
That's huge. That's huge. What, if you were to look at your own, either your own leadership, and what changes would you like to see happen, say I know you're American and we have different health situations in terms of healthcare and wellness, but what would you, I'm not sure the right scope because these are systemic changes I'm going to ask you about.
Yeah.
What would you like to see change in the next 5, 10, 20 years?
Yeah. So I've thought a lot about this because as I am coming into my 30th year and my children are all grown and flown, and I have this opportunity to make big impact beyond just my little office and my website and all that stuff. I really, what I would really like to see over the next 5 to 10 years is, in America, we have all these healthcare insurance companies and we have Medicare and we have Medicaid. I would really like to see insurance companies include nutrition education for parents as part of their package. I would really like to see them, offer new parents the basics of getting started with feeding a baby in the first year of life. I would really like to see pediatrician offices have a pediatric dietitian or nutritionist in the office that can be there to help families in the moment. I would also like to see pediatrician offices offering education, on the little TV monitors in the waiting room and sending families home with quality instructions, not just a piece of paper, but a video or a series of educational materials where parents can learn on their own time. I would also, like to see companies and corporations offering this kind of education to their employees. Parents that are working in the corporate world, they're working parents. Their challenges are different. They don't have the time to go see a dietitian or a nutritionist if their child is having a problem. These educational opportunities need to be available within that corporation. And so I would like to see corporate America supporting parents much more on family nutrition and all the childhood nutrition things that they could be doing for families just to help them make their lives easier. You want me to keep going?
Oh, I do. But, I also have to tell you, so I am tingling from head to toe listening to you. And so I'm just going to share that is like usually my lightning rod for intuition, like as far as like, go, 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 go. Yes, yes, yes. So, and it's also painting a vision of a more compassionate and, a more compassionate look at the employee as the whole person. And I think things are better there than they used to be, but it's also bringing in the family.
Yeah. Honoring the role of parent. It's nice to say, oh, I have all these people working for me, they're parents, but are you really supporting them? Like, are you really honoring they've got a job when they go home and they've got a job before they come to work. Are you helping them do those jobs too? I would challenge companies and organizations to do a better job of that because when they do, they're going to have employees who are more committed to them, who have children that are sick and out of the office, supporting women who and fathers who just have their first child. We could do more with that. And I think there needs to be more responsibility in food marketing to children. I really do. I think there needs to be, I would encourage and push companies that are developing products to make meaningful products for children that are good products and wholesome products for children. Then you can market the heck out of them. I don't care, but make sure they're meaningful and good for kids.
Well, you have your work cut out for you.
I do. Sometimes I literally go, Laura, I have all these ideas and I'm like, how in the hell am I going to get this stuff done? I have no idea, but I have decided that I can't keep this stuff inside me. I have to keep talking about it because once I talk about it, it becomes more real and it becomes more I don't know, it just becomes more common in my brain, and something I can talk about and I just hope and pray that if I talk about it more, then maybe somebody will hear it and somebody will say, let's do this. You are right. Let's do it.
So listeners, you're hearing this. And that, I think, is some of the power of being able to connect and speak in forums like this, where you just don't know who's going to hear what, but it also establishes, like you say, a practice of yourself articulating it out into the world, instead of keeping it all, up here or here.
Yeah.
And I can relate to that from my own point of view, because there's some really uncomfortable things that are there for me to address in my own industry, and if I, within the self-help industry.
Yeah.
And what I've observed, especially of late, is that energy comes around when you least expect it.
Yep.
It's not linear as much as we would like it to be. That's much more like an instant result.
Yeah.
But I think people are waking up to certain things.
Yeah. I've learned the same thing. And just personally, like I said, that seed was planted 23 years ago when I had my first child, and I kept that close to my heart for a long time. And it wasn't really, I guess the process of letting it out was when I did the TEDx talk and I told my story with my first child and what a challenge it was to feed her. And, that's when a lot of this started coming out, and I was like, why? I don't need to keep this stuff in anymore. I might not be the person that's able to actually materialize everything, but it's an idea out there that I think, should be out in the world. It should be said. And I encourage, I think as I get older and I'm in this field for longer and longer, I get more fearless. That's not to say I don't have fears. That's not to say I don't want to take on, some big food corporation and go to town with them head to head. I don't want that conflict in my life. I don't want that controversy. However, I am getting more fearless in putting out there the things that I think are wrong when it comes to child nutrition and the lack of support that parents get, which is unfair. And I'm just one person. I can't do it all myself. But if there are listeners out there that are working in this industry, I'm sure this resonates with them, because if you're working in it, you see it every day.
So let's end on a story.
Okay.
Lots of times the stories come at the beginning, but let's end on the story of what it was like for you because you went into this field. Am I correct in thinking you went into the field before the challenge occurred? Is that correct?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay. So there you were, and you had your very own challenge.
Yeah. Yeah. So I had my first child. I had been a pediatric dietitian for 7 years already. And I had worked at 2 very famous hospitals in pediatric nutrition. I, was at the top of my game, basically. And so when I got pregnant with my first child, I was like, oh, feeding and nutrition is going to be so dang easy. I've got this. We don't have to worry about this. We need to worry about sleeping habits and potty training. I have no clue about those, but feeding her, I got it. It didn't turn out to be very easy. She was a smaller child and not very interested in eating. I did my system and my, 3 meals, 3 snacks, did everything I knew was right to do. But at a year, she was underweight, and by 18 months, she was anemic. And it was all food and feeding. And I was following the whole balanced meals. And when she says she's done, take her out. I wasn't forcing her to eat or anything like that. And I ran into troubles. And so it was a very humbling, upsetting time, because there was a lot of shame around the fact that here I am, a expert in pediatric nutrition, and I can't even feed my own child. So that was a comeuppance for sure.
So but it's like, hello, imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was, but it wasn't only that. It was like, oh my God, this is my child, and this is her brain and her body, and I'm really like screwing things up. Of course, I put all the blame on me, but as it turns out, she is, she's 23 now. She's perfectly fine and healthy. She had a very different personality and approach to food, and I had to learn her temperament, her personality, and I had to work with that, as opposed to following some guideline from books that I learned from.
Mm.
And so I think that has, at a minimum, taught me this great intuition around feeding children. And I bring that intuition to the parents that I work with as well. You have to know your child. And a lot of times parents will say, is it bad if I make them take a bite? You need to know your child. How does your child interpret this? Do they interpret it as pressure, or do they and balk and put their feet down and resist, or are they compliant and easygoing and take as many bites as you tell them to
Say,
take?
thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, so I learned a lot from that, and I had my humble pie. I ate my humble pie, but I guess bigger than that, I started to really realize that, boy, oh boy, if I had 7 years of training and education and experience in my field, and I struggled, what the heck is this like for parents who have no education, no training, and no experience with raising and feeding children? I mean, they're up against a lot. And so I have great compassion for parents who are muddling through this whole nutrition and feeding thing, because I don't believe it's easy. It wasn't easy for me. It's never, it's been, I'm educated, and it's been such a great anchor to raising my own 4 children. And I think I've done a good job of that. But at the same time, I recognize it's a lot of work, and I put a lot of effort into it. And as a result, I've created children that I think are capable, independent, well-adjusted kids when it comes to food and eating and their bodies. And that's all I really wanted. I wanted them to be able to grow up and take care of themselves, and take care of themselves well. And I think I've done that. But I recognize I put a lot of time and effort into that. It's a priority for me, and I made it a priority. And I did it with complete sensitivity to the fact that I am a dietitian, and it would be so easy for me to fall into the trap of eat clean food and don't eat that, and let me instruct you on everything about nutrition. I didn't do any of that. I don't think I did any of that. My kids might tell you something different, but I was really careful about how I talked about food and about how I interacted with them around food, because I'm a dietitian. That's a loaded topic right there.
And it must give you such great context and empathy and a sense of what, not just what the individual needs, but what we need as a community and a society as well.
Yeah, I think so. It's helped me tremendously. If I don't think I would be as effective at what I do now if I hadn't faced that early challenge, and if I hadn't, been a parent of, 4 children born in 5 years. I mean, talk about chaos at the table. There was chaos at the table. But that had, for whatever reason, divine intervention, whatever, that's my reality. I'm a pediatric dietitian. I have 4 kids, and I had my challenges too. And that's my story. And I think it has made me a better clinician. But I also think it helps me help parents in a more sensitive, tuned in way.
Well, Jill, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your experience and also your vision for what's possible. Because, this podcast is about connecting to your inner wisdom and having an impact. It's very easy to see where the impact would be so helpful, and how, if we're in an ongoing daily battle around nutrition, how do we have energy and stamina and focus for much else?
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me and allowing me to speak about this topic. It's something I love to talk about. And so I thank you for allowing me to share on your platform.
My pleasure. And where, if someone wants to go and connect with you, where is the best place online for them to do that?
So my website, jillcastle.com, and everything is there. Blog, podcast, my services, speaking, all of that stuff. Everything's under jillcastle.com.
Okay, wonderful.
Thank
you.
you.
Take care.
Okay, you
Bye-bye.
too. Thanks.